Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. In this video I'll be wrapping up my discussion on the optimized starter decks for deck limited battles by going over the purple Kaido starter deck. I've always been a big fan of this deck from the start because I think it has the most neutral matchups across the board, and the deck matches my playstyle because it's so versatile. This deck has draw, ramp, removal, rush, and flood capabilities, so there's a lot to work with to react to the game state. I do think this deck is capable of bad opening hands, and it has issues with consistency in general at times, but if it gets rolling early, I think it's hard to beat. The leader card for this deck, Kaido, has 5000 base power and 5 life. He has a very strong effect once per turn. Don -7, trash up to one of your opponent's life cards. This means that your opponent sends their life card directly to the trash instead of building up their hand, and they're not able to activate any triggers. It's not uncommon to pull this off twice in one game, and while 7 Don is a lot, you can recover by using some of the ramp cards in the deck. It's also worth noting that this does not have to be active Don, so you can spend all of your Don to play down characters or boost attack power during your turn, and still use those rested Don for this effect. Black Maria is a low cost blocker in this deck. It's unfortunate that she costs 2 Dawn to play instead of 1 like the other low cost blockers in the starter decks, but even at 2 costs this is a must play at 4. She does have 2000 power with a counter 1000 as well, but the extra power doesn't compensate for the extra cost in my opinion. I just prefer if she were able to be played on turn 1 regardless if I go first or not, but this is what the deck has to work with. Sheep's Head is a 2 cost 4000 power vanilla with counter 1000. It might be an odd play at 4, but there is a reason behind why I chose to max him out. One of my playtesting partners did really well in a 256 person webcam tournament, getting 3rd place overall, and I found out that his list was only 2 cards off of my list. He split Jin Rummy and Sheep's Head at 2 each, and I split Sheep's Head and X-Drake at 2 each. After he explained to me how playing low cost cards early helped him against the green matchup, I thought it made a good amount of sense, but I figured I'd just increase my Sheep's Head to 4 since I believe it accomplishes the same goal. Jack is a great early play to help ramp your Dawn when you fail to get an Onigashima in your opening hand. He's a 3 cost with 4000 power and counter 1000 with an on play effect that lets you trash a card from your hand in order to add 1 Dawn from your Dawn deck and set it as active. It's one of the few ramp cards available, so it's a vital part of the deck's strategy. I recommend playing 4 to get an early Dawn advantage or recover Dawn later on in the game. Sasaki is another 3 cost with 4000 power and counter 1000, and his effect is essentially the opposite of Jack. On play, return 1 Dawn to your Dawn deck in order to draw a card. Draw is always powerful, and I think he's a good play at 4 because once you get your Onigashima into play, then you basically get a free draw whenever you play this card. Drawing an additional card can also help you get into your higher cost cards quicker by digging into the deck, so Sasaki is a pretty good card for purple in this format. Who's Who is, in my opinion, a better version of Killer from the green starter deck. He's a 3 cost 3000 power with no counter, but his effect allows you to return 1 Dawn to your Dawn deck in order to KO one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 3 or less. The reason I like this better than Killer is because it doesn't have to be a rested character. This card also has a trigger allowing you to play it straight onto your board, so I like to play 4 of these to capitalize on that possibility. Ulti is a must play at 4 because not only is she the 2000 counter card for the deck, but she also has a very useful on play effect that lets you build up some board presence. By returning 1 Dawn to your Dawn deck, she allows you to play a page 1 with a cost of 4 or less from your hand. She's a solid attacker with base 5000 power and only costs 4 Dawn, but I usually try not to put her into play without the page 1 in hand because it would just feel like a waste. Page 1 is a 4 cost with 6000 power and counter 1000. 4 cost vanillas with 6000 power are already worth including into these starter decks, but being able to play this card for free with Ulti's effect makes this a must play at 4. Queen is a big blocker for this deck. It's a 5 cost with 6000 power and counter 1000. Queen also has a secondary effect to go along with blocker, where on play you may return 1 Dawn to your Dawn deck in order to draw 2 cards, and then you choose 1 card to trash from your hand. Another card that you need to be playing 4 of to give yourself 8 total blockers, and the secondary effect is one of the better ways to draw in the current format. 6000 power makes this card a scary attacker as well when you're going all in to finish off the game. King is my favorite card in the deck because he's a strong attacker with 7000 power for a 6 cost card, and his effect has you return a Dawn to your Dawn deck in order to KO one of your opponent's characters in play with a cost of 4 or less. This is a great removal card and it lets you get rid of several low cost blockers and strong attackers. I choose to play this at 4 because I'll play this card above pretty much everything whenever I'm able to. It gives this deck a form of board control, and that 7000 7,000 base power is tough to counter. The 9 cost Kaido is the closeout attacker for the deck. It has the strongest base power in the format with 10,000, and you may also choose to give this card Rush, meaning you can attack the turn this card is played by returning 5 Dawn cards to your Dawn deck. This effect also allows you to KO one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 6 or less, so he's a big momentum swing whenever you're able to play him. This card has so much going for it that I play it at 4 just to better ensure that I see it every game, but since you'll likely only play one a game, I could see it being dropped down to 3, that way that you don't have a handful of this card before you have the Dawn to play it. Moving on to the event cards, we have the 1 cost counter event, Blast Breath, where Dawn -1, one of your character or leader cards gains plus 4,000 power during this battle. Paying 1 Dawn and returning 1 Dawn is worth a 4,000 counter, so I think it's a must play at 4. It's just a solid card that allows you to protect characters and life. Brachio Bomber is the card that I'm torn on. It's very situational since it costs so much to play, but for 6 Dawn you KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 6 or less. Then you add 1 Dawn from your Dawn deck and set it as active. It also has a trigger where you just add the 1 Dawn from your Dawn deck. There's a lot to like about it, but paying the cost to play this card most likely means that you're not playing a strong character down onto the field, and I don't think you can afford to play too many copies of this since it doesn't provide any counter either, so you won't be able to trigger this card off of life often enough if that's the case. I play 2 just because it does do some great things, but I'm open to changing this card out for more counters. The undisputed best card in this deck is the Onigashima Island Stage card. It's the card you pretty much mulligan for 100% of the time if you don't have it in your initial opening hand because it makes the whole deck go. Ideally you play it on turn 2 since it is a 3 cost, and if your leader has the Animal Kingdom Pirates type, then once during your turn you may rest this card in order to add 1 Dawn from your Dawn deck and put it into play as rested. This deck would struggle to function properly if you don't see it at some point in the game because it ramps your Dawn so that you can rest them to play some of your big cost characters or spend them to use various effects. Onigashima is a mandatory 4 copies in this deck. There are plenty of leftover cards to consider adding to this deck. I usually don't recommend 1 cost vanilla cards, but since I've seen some success with them, it would be irresponsible of me to not at least acknowledge Jin Rummy as a potential addition to the deck. She's a 1 cost, 3,000 power with counter 1,000, and I could see it as an early play to get things going since there aren't any 1 cost character cards in this deck. X-Drake is a card that I've had in here before because I like to play the 3 cost vanillas with 5,000 power, but as I discussed earlier, I decided to max Sheep's Head as a way to have an early play. I don't think X-Drake is a must-have since there are several other 3 cost character cards I'd probably rather play, but in this format, these 3 cost vanillas are never a bad play. The promo Kaido card is a card that I tested out, and I frequently trashed it for effects, so it wasn't the card for me, but maybe someone else would find it useful. He's a 7 cost, 8,000 power with an effect to return 2 Dawn cards to the Dawn deck in order to give the card Vanish. Vanish means that when this card deals damage, the life card goes to the trash without activating any triggers. The Vanish ability is quite good, and in theory it would work pretty well with a Kaido leader, but for that cost I'd much rather play a King or the 9 cost Kaido. So some tips, don't forget to use Kaido's effect and Onigashima. I use Onigashima at the beginning of the turn so that I don't forget, unless I plan to play a card where I'm going to Dawn -1 anyway, in which case most people just declare this action that they're going to immediately replace the Dawn with the stage card. If you do this, especially in tournament play, make sure that you do so cleanly. This deck moves quite a bit, so it's easy to forget to complete actions from your effects, such as trashing a Dawn from your hand, so stay on top of that as well. Against red, I recommend focus more on characters that provide offense. You don't want to spend 5 Dawn for a queen when they can just go through your blockers, so keep up with them in life exchange and use counters instead of blockers. You should do fine since you have the advantage to trash life with Kaido's ability. Green can be tough if they get off to a fast start, so if you're able to ramp, try to overwhelm them with strong cards and remove cards with effects. Winning board is the key to beating green. Blue can be just as frustrating for this deck as it is for any deck, but you'll at least have access to a lot of on-play effects that you're able to take advantage of. I believe the combination of trashing life and having 9 cost Kaido that blue can't remove makes this matchup slightly favorable. That concludes my analysis of the Purple Kaido starter deck that I've been using for deck limited battles. Like I said before, it's my favorite of the 4, and I think it gets a lot better once the first set is released as well, so I'm looking forward to that. I think this deck has a strong play right now with the rise of blue in deck limited battles, but the only thing that might hold it back is a higher probability for bad starts in a long tournament, since it does rely on the Onigashima. If you're interested in the other starter decks, I've now made videos that cover all of them, so you can go check those out. Like this video if you enjoyed what I had to say, and consider subscribing for more One Piece card game content. I have a lot of ideas for future videos that I'm excited to work on following deck limited battles, and I'll keep you all updated on what my plan is for those. But that's all I have for this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.